Once there was a king who had a servant. The king handed the servant 100 gold pieces and instructed him to go to the market and buy some fresh fish for dinner. When the servant got to the market, he did indeed find fresh fish selling for 100 gold pieces and 3-day-old fish selling for just 50 gold pieces. The servant judged that he could do the king's errand and make some money on the deal, and so he bought the 3-day-old fish and pocketed the extra 50 gold pieces. Well, the king took one bite of the fish and spit it out of his mouth. He understood instantly what his servant had done and immediately called for him to be brought before his throne. "You thought you were clever," the king said to the servant, "but all you've done is earn punishment. I'll give you a choice of 3. You can eat the entire fish you brought me, or you can accept a whipping, or you can reimburse me the full 100 gold pieces that I gave you." Well, there was no way the servant was going to give the money back, and he didn't want a whipping. So he said to himself, how bad could the fish possibly taste? And he elected to eat the fish. After 2 or 3 bites, he threw up everything he'd eaten and then some. But he still hadn't eaten the entire fish as the king had required. Well, he wasn't about to give the money back, and so he decided to accept the whipping. After all, how bad could it be? Well, after 2 or 3 strokes across his back, the servant was crying and screaming for mercy. In the end, he gave the king back the 100 gold pieces. The servant had thought that he was cleverer than the king, and because of that, he not only earned a punishment, but brought down every conceivable punishment on his own head. You now know all you really need to know about the modern state of Israel. A servant that thought it was cleverer than its king, God, and so has brought down upon its own head not just one punishment, but every conceivable punishment. By founding Israel as its secular state, worrying more about what the world thought of it than the lives of its own citizens, by kowtowing to people who want to destroy it, allowing murderers and terrorists to remain in the country and serve as a 4th column working towards its destruction, by burning forests, importing weapons, blowing up buses and restaurants, kidnapping children, raping women, avoiding paying taxes, desecrating holy places, the oh-so-sophisticated and clever secular leaders of Israel have not only earned a punishment from the king, but every possible conceivable punishment. At least the servant in the story finally came to his senses. The secular leaders of the state of Israel have yet to do so. Instead, they continue to pursue a so-called peace process that can only end in their own destruction. They tear Jews from their homes on Jewish land, allow the Temple Mount to be desecrated daily, put its people's lives at risk, make the very name Israel a global laughingstock, and inexcusably drag the holy name of God Almighty through the mud. The path to peace in Israel is clear. The so-called Palestinians must go, willingly or not. Control of the Temple Mount must be restored to the Jewish people. The temple must be rebuilt. The educational system must be overhauled to teach Israeli Jews what Judaism is and why it's important. And Israel's leaders must decide to make decisions independent of their historic overlords in the U.S. State Department, the United Nations, the European Union, and the Arab League. Once the political mafia that runs the state of Israel does true tshuva, realizing that it is not cleverer than the king, and that it has in fact brought needless suffering down upon its own head and the heads of the Israeli people, then the punishments will stop, and we will usher in the era of messianic redemption. I'm Howard Riell. I'm Yisrael Chai.